Okay, so let's jump right in. When you think about a doll, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Probably a kid's toy, right? Or maybe a collector's item sitting on a shelf somewhere. And for most of us, that's pretty much where the story stops. But what if I told you that's just the tip of the iceberg? The dolls have this whole secret life that goes way beyond the toy box, into the really complex worlds of therapy, companionship, and even healing.
So, is it really more than just a toy? That's the big question we're going to dig into. Because, as you'll see, in all sorts of places, from clinical settings to private homes, these inanimate objects are right at the center of some incredibly deep human experiences. And they're kind of challenging everything we thought we knew about relationships, comfort, and connection itself. To really get this, we need to wrap our heads around this key concept, the synthetic relationship. Now, the core idea here is pretty simple, but it's powerful. The companion, the doll itself, is synthetic. It's inanimate. But the emotions it brings out in a person, the comfort, the attachment, the feeling of purpose, those are 100% real. You can actually see it and measure it. So let's start in a place you might not expect, the world of medicine. Because here, this idea isn't just a theory, it's actually being put into practice. We're going to look at how dolls are being used as a real, legitimate bridge to healing. Think about an older adult who's living with dementia. Giving them a doll isn't about treating them like a child. Far from it. It's what's called a non-pharmacological intervention, which is just a fancy way of saying it's a therapeutic tool that isn't a pill. It's used to improve their well-being, often cutting down on the need for medications to manage anxiety or distress. It's all about reconnecting them with a sense of purpose and comfort. And the benefits? They're actually really well documented. You see patients who were quiet suddenly start talking, first to the doll and then to their caregivers. You see a real drop in things like anxiety and agitation. It can even help with the basics, like eating and sleeping better. But at its heart, it's giving them a powerful sense of attachment and comfort in a world that can feel incredibly confusing. And this quote from Memory Connect just hits the nail on the head. For someone going through that kind of distress, this simple physical act of holding and caring for a doll can be an anchor. It's a calming presence when everything else feels overwhelming. Now let's switch gears a bit and see how this exact same idea works with children. For a kid who's been through something traumatic, words can be impossible. They just might not have the vocabulary or the emotional ability to explain what happened. And that's where a doll becomes this incredibly critical tool. It literally becomes their voice. Just take a look at this. This doll was made by an 8-year-old girl, Alicia, while she was in therapy for sexual abuse. Art therapists say that using dolls like this lets a child safely get out feelings and talk about experiences that are just way too scary to say out loud. The doll becomes a canvas for everything that's going on inside them. So how does this actually work? Well, it breaks down into a few steps. First, the child externalizes the conflict. They put it onto the doll. It's so much safer to say this happened to the doll than this happened to me. Second, they can play out scenarios over and over, helping them make sense of it. But here's the most important part. They get to regain control. In their playtime, they can change the story, they can rescue the doll, and they can create a new narrative where they are the powerful one. That's huge for recovery. Okay, so we've seen the clinical side of things, but what happens when you step outside the therapist office? Let's talk about the world of adult doll enthusiasts, a community that, let's be honest, is often surrounded by a whole lot of stigma and misunderstanding. Yeah, there are some pretty persistent myths out there. The common story you hear is that people who collect these super realistic reborn dolls must be coping with some kind of trauma, like losing a child. But when you actually look at the research, a totally different story emerges. The motivations are all over the map. It's often about creative play, comfort, and this is a big one, a desire for social connection, which they find in these huge online communities and conventions built around the hobby. So what are people actually getting out of this? Well, the psychological benefits they report really boil down to 3 things we all crave. First, comfort. The simple physical act of holding something can be incredibly soothing. Second, identity. Owners create these backstories and roles for their dolls, which gives them a sense of purpose. And finally, companionship. And it's not just the doll itself, it's the shared interest that connects them to other people, forging real friendships. All right, now we're going to carefully wade into the most, let's say, controversial area here. Adult-sized dolls. It's really important that we try to look past the immediate stigma and focus on what the research actually says about the role they can play in mental and, yes, even sexual health. So, the immediate gut reaction for a lot of people is that these dolls are exclusively for sex. But the survey data?
it paints a much more complex picture. For a really significant number of owners, companionship is a primary reason for having one, sometimes even more so than physical intimacy.
This chart is honestly fascinating. Check out this breakdown from one survey. Only 14% of owners said they use their dolls exclusively for sex. Now look at the other reasons. A whopping 30% said companionship. Another 25% cited mental health or using it as a coping mechanism. And 16% for art, like photography. The story is clearly not one-dimensional at all. So you might be asking yourself, why would someone use a doll for mental health? Well, think about it. For people who struggle with severe social anxiety or who've been through emotional trauma, interacting with other humans can feel threatening. In that context, a doll can offer what's called a safe presence. It's a companion that offers zero judgment, makes no demands, and carries no risk of hurting them. And this quote from researchers puts it perfectly. They call these dolls a functional tool. In other words, by substituting for human interaction that might be unavailable or just too difficult, they can genuinely improve a person's life satisfaction and their overall mental well-being. But, of course, it's not all simple. Researchers talk about something called the vulnerability paradox. It's a two-sided coin. On one side, yes, these dolls can provide a safe space and reduce loneliness. But on the other side, there are potential risks. Critics worry that it could reinforce objectification or lead to an unhealthy emotional dependency, where the doll replaces, rather than just supplements, real human connection. So, after looking at everything from dementia care to childhood trauma to adult companionship, what's the big picture here? What does all of this tell us about the future of human connection? I want to bring us back to this quote because it really is the heart of this whole thing. The object, the doll, isn't real. We know that. But the human response to it, the love, the comfort, the feeling of being needed, that is absolutely real. It's observable, it's measurable, and for a lot of people, it's truly therapeutic. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if we're talking about a dementia patient finding a quiet moment of peace, a child finding a way to speak, or an isolated adult finding a sense of companionship. The doll is just the conduit. It's simply meeting a fundamental, timeless human drive for attachment, for purpose, and for connection in a world where those things can sometimes be really hard to find. And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. As our technology keeps blurring the lines between what's alive and what isn't, and as our companions become more and more synthetic, what does that reveal about us? About our deep, unchanging, and universal need to connect with something, anything outside of ourselves?